Hello, YouTube. It is time for my review of Doctor Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme. Now, this movie is the fourth animated movie in the what they called the Marvel's animated features. Again, this was back when Lionsgate and Marvel Animation were doing animated movies. Um, this movie, this movie, um, like the like the Invincible Iron Man, it is the origin story. And Dr. Stephen Strange, he was a jerk. He's just, no one is, nobody is that big of an asshole just to be an asshole. There's a reason behind it. And the movie, explores that and why, Stephen Strange was, the way that he was before he became, the Sorcerer Supreme. And the movie is very much about out of all the movies that Lionsgate and Marvel Animation did, this movie is the biggest. This movie is the biggest transformation that we've seen of a character emotionally, and it is very much. The movie is very much about Stephen Strange's journey to become the Sorcerer Supreme. And the movie opens, we meet Stephen Strange as early as the first few minutes into the movie. He's in his car on the way to work, on the way to the hospital, and there are the sorcerers. Wong. If you've seen the first Doctor Strange movie from the MCU, you will know who these characters are. But Wong, Mordo, and then some characters that actually weren't in the first Doctor Strange live action movie, whose names I don't think are mentioned in the movie, but they are other sorcerers among Wong and Mordo, and they are trying to stop a monster. They are trying to stop a creature who is terrorizing the city, and Dormammu's influence grows stronger by the day. He is still locked away in his own dimension. His influence grows stronger by the day as he is figuring out a way, to come back and come. He's not dead. He's stuck in his dimension, so he is figuring out a way. Out of his dimension, basically, to come back another way. So we meet Doctor Strange, the first few minutes into the movie, and he is, like I said before, he is, on his way to the hospital. and he sees Wong and, and Mordo and the other sorcerers, doing their thing and, performing their, their, their spells and stuff like that. So, so when Doctor Strange gets to the hospital, he, right off the bat, you can see that he's just an asshole. He's just an asshole. He's not a likable person at all. And, so for example, like one of the guys who works at the hospital, he's trying to present Doctor Strange with like these, with like these patient files saying, hey, I've got, I've got this, excuse me, I've got this person who needs, yada, yada, yada. And Doctor Strange is, on his way to his office, and he just basically slams the door in his face. It's basically saying, would a medical journalist be interested in the, in any of these cases? And he's like, then neither am I. And, and just basically slams the door in his face. So you can see that he is, he's not a likable person. He's not a nice guy. Like Tony Stark, Stephen Strange, unlike Tony Stark, is not charming. He's not a nice guy. He's just, he hasn't, and, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, Tony Stark obviously has an ego too, but, but he was at least, he was, there was more to him, than just his ego. And, there was more to Tony, than just his ego. But, so a doctor that, so one of the hospital managers comes into Stephen's office saying that Dr. Gina Atwater, who is a fellow colleague of Stephen's, but she is also someone that he was once involved with. And Stephen Strange is obviously, like this world famous surgeon. He's got lots of money. He's got, so he and he was once involved with this doctor, and one of the managers comes in saying, hey, basically saying, like how much she wants to strangle him in his, just basically, like how frustrated she is with him because she needs him, she needs his help with, she needs his help with something in particular. And Stephen is just basically like, yeah, not happening. So, so finally he, Oliver, one of the hospital managers, is basically like, look, let's just stop the dance, Stephen. And, so he finally agrees to go see her, and help her. And he finally agrees, to go see her and help her. And he goes to see her, and he's examining a child who is in a coma. And and she's apparently having these nightmares. She's apparently having these nightmares, and he's looking her over, and he sees something. And he sees something. He sees like a vision in while while he's examining her, he sees like a vision. He sees like a vision, basically, like of like like what her nightmare is about, and and then he's just basically like, yeah, I'm done. So so he walks out, and and Dr. Atwater's like yelling at him, saying, like, I'm sick, of this hospital feeding, your monster ego. It is time, it's time that you start giving back. So, and so he's leaving the hospital, and now much like in the original in the original comic book, in the original Strange Tales, I think number 115, which told the origin of Doctor Strange, he is driving, and then all of a sudden he loses control of his car, and he gets into an accident, and he wakes up in the hospital, and Gina is and Gina is there with him, and she's saying, you've been under for 3 days, but the good news is, you're going to be okay. And then he looks at his hands, and then he looks at his hands, which are all he looks at his hands, which are all like very, very like heavily bandaged up, and then he asks to see his chart, and his hands, and then he finds out that his hands are very, very severely damaged, obviously as a result of the crash. And this this movie isn't just about Doctor Strange becoming the Sorcerer Supreme. It's also very much about a man who whose entire life obviously is in his hands as a surgeon, and then he he loses them in a he loses them in a he loses the ability to use them in a in a car accident, and and that very much carries through the movie. It's something that that very, very heavily weighs on him, and so as a result of that, he starts making like all sorts of phone calls, like he starts traveling like to different hospitals and stuff like that all over the world, literally spending like all the money that he has trying to get treatment for his hands, and literally everybody that he goes to basically say to him, I'm sorry, but the the damage is the damage is is too severe. And he's traveling like all over the world to, he's traveling all over the world and, spending all of his money um, specialists and, seeing, all different doctors and literally all of them are telling him, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. The damage is too severe. So he, um, um, so he becomes, this was, but the really, really unique thing about this movie is in the comic book, we never really get a reason as to why Doctor Strange, was such an asshole before he became, the Sorcerer Supreme. But in this animated movie, um, they took it a step further and they were like, well, okay, what if we actually expanded upon the source material a little bit and actually gave a reason as to why, he was, the way that he was. And that's something that is really, really interesting about this, about this movie. And so finally Wong comes to him. Wong finds him and says to him, and basically tells him not to lose hope because healing awaits him in Tibet. So he goes to see Gina, who's just leaving, who's just getting in her car to leave. And he says to her, I have to get to Tibet. And so she, she very much, still has, feelings for him, but Doctor Strange being, the way that he is, just, egotistical and bitter and and everything else just doesn't want to, doesn't want to think about it. But he goes to her saying, I need to get to Tibet. So he travels all the way to Tibet, to where the Ancient One is, and that's where he meets. The Ancient One and Mordo. Mordo in this movie, Mordo in this movie is pretty much on his way to becoming a bad guy. He's not. The beginning of the movie, he's not quite there yet, but he is very selfish. He's very very selfish. He gets pissed off easily. He's very, like hot-tempered and hot-headed and egotistical and, all the things, basically, all those exciting qualities on the road to becoming a bad guy. and the Ancient One, who is basically on his way out. He's very, very sick. He's very, very sick, which is why Dormammu is making his move now. He pretty much knows, that the Ancient One is on his way out. So he figures, if I'm gonna, so Dormammu figures, I need to make my move now. So he meets, the Ancient One, and they start Stephen off with like this, they basically have him cleaning. Like like you see him like you see him go to sleep, and then he wakes up the next morning, and they have him like scrubbing the floor, and they also have him tearing down this wall, using like the sledgehammer, and breaking down this enormous like rock wall. This enormous rock wall. And the reason they're doing that is because they're basically trying, something happened in Stephen's past which is obviously revealed in the movie, but something, a tragedy happened in Stephen's past that he couldn't accept, which is one of the reasons why he was who he was in the beginning. And so by having him tear down this wall, they're trying to, the Ancient One is basically trying to teach him, you need to accept what, you need to accept the unacceptable. You need to accept the fact that this was, you need to accept that this was beyond your control. There's you can't there was nothing that you could do at the time. It was it was out of your hands. So another, this movie is much like the others, but this one especially is just it's beautifully drawn. The guys at Marvel Animation, Craig, Greg, Frank, everybody, they looked at all sorts of Doctor Strange comics going into this movie, that they looked at all different like all different art styles. They looked at like Frank Brunner, who did Doctor Strange at one point, who has an incredible style. He has a really, really distinctive style, and it's so beautiful, and it's so incredible. And they went through pretty much like all the fan favorite artists when they were doing the movie. And obviously you can't do them all as much as you want to, so they had to find something that they felt like would represent the comic book, and and the different like art styles, and the look of the characters and stuff like that. But yeah, no, this movie is just so good. This movie actually has a lot in common with the first live action movie, the first Doctor Strange with Benedict Cumberbatch. Apparently, from what I understand, Cumberbatch actually watched this movie when he as like part of his research when he was cast as Doctor Strange, and he really, really liked it. And he, from what I heard, he wanted that movie to be like, to have some similarities between, he wanted his movie to have some similarities with this animated movie, and it really does. there are a lot of similarities. Um, there are a lot of similarities. There are a lot of similarities here between the two movies. Um, not not all of I mean, um the different characters will obviously have different, abilities and stuff like that. You can't like you can't create these characters and not have them have, at least, at least some limitations, right? Because obviously, otherwise it's too easy. So, so like some characters like Wong, Mordo, Doctor Strange, well, they're, while they're, while their, magic powers are, are natural, other sorcerers in the movie will have, um, will use, will have, will have ways to channel, um, their magic. Like some will use like scarves. Some will use, there's one guy in the movie who uses like a stick, um, a stick or a staff, whatever you want to call it. Um, um, but yeah, so so different characters in the movie will have different ways of channeling, um, their magic and their abilities, and um, and it obviously and and it obviously comes down, by the end of the movie. Obviously, the only ones left are him and Wong, Doctor Strange and Wong, and um, basically by the end of the movie, Um, it's up to them to, to stop Mordo and Dormammu, who has finally come back. Um, who has finally come back and who has finally risen again. Well, I shouldn't say risen again because he wasn't dead, but I mean, but you know what I mean. But um, yeah, no, this movie is a great. Um, this movie is a great. Um, um, this movie is a great introduction to Doctor Strange. Both fans of the character and also people who have no idea who Doctor Strange is. This movie will very much. Um, this movie will very much. This movie will very much introduce you to the Doctor Strange lore, who Doctor Strange is, why he was, the person that he was, um, as well as who he becomes later on in the movie. How he becomes the Sorcerer Supreme. Um, but yeah, no, if you guys haven't seen this movie, I would very, 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 very highly recommend it. This is one of the best animated movies that Marvel has done. This is definitely a favorite of mine, and I would definitely very, very highly recommend it. So let me know if you guys have seen it, if you liked it, like, subscribe, and I will talk to you guys later. Peace.